When it comes to the items that are inside of a sales order, a purchase order, or even an outsourced purchase order that are being sold and purchased in different currencies, the way in which the currency conversion calculator works within the document is a little bit different depending on the scenario. So I'll go ahead and show you like a couple of simple examples starting with sales orders. Then we'll work into purchase orders, and then I'll even show you a little bit about the outsourced purchase orders. I'm going to repeat myself probably a lot in this video, but it's mostly just for demonstration purposes to help you be more familiar with how this dynamic works. Multicurrency is a complicated tool, and it's important for you to know how it works in the Katana app because it'll help you avoid mistakes or recognize if you made one previously. So firstly, I want to show you that the way in which Katana works for sales orders, and we've already talked about it before, is that on an item card, let's say if we're going to be looking at a coffee table, you'll see that the coffee table listed on this item card is being sold at a default sales price of 540 euros. That's our default sales price. So that means anytime we make a sales order that is automatic in our system, let's say we create a new customer, we'll just do test customer or test one, it'll be created in the base currency. So I'll do coffee table, and it's not complicated or rocket science. The price appears here based on what's on the item card. Now, if I were to create it with a customer who has a default currency that's different from euros, let's say this one, which we used in a previous example, then it's going to say, okay, well, we're going to take the price that's on the item card and convert it from euros to Australian dollars. That's pretty self-explanatory. So I'll just hit yes and then convert, and then it becomes 855 Australian dollars. So this is not really a problem. This is the sales price that is coming off the item card automatically when we make a sales order. But there is something that you need to be aware of when you're making adjustments to a sales order of where the source of truth lies. If you ever change the price per unit on a sales order, you will have a situation where it's never ever going to use the default sales price again when you're making adjustments between different currencies. So if I change this back to euros, it'll go back to the 540 euro value, which is the default sales price for that item. Now, what happens if I start doing something differently and I start manipulating the price on that individual sales order? Things start to change differently from that perspective. So if, for example, I changed back to Australian dollars, it'll convert it to 855.04. But if I change the price of it while it's in a different currency, then what happens? So let's say I make that 900. 900 Australian dollars in this case would convert to a different price of 568.39 euros instead of 540, which we had previously. So since that change has taken place and we have manipulated the price per unit here, if I change it back to euros, then it should have this amount as well. So 568.39 is what we get in that situation. So it's no longer the default price that we have on our item card since we've manipulated the actual sales price. So if you make those changes while it's in a different currency other than the base currency, and then you don't see the default price here, then it could be related to the fact that the price was changed as a result of it being adjusted at some point in the past. Now, if I am, for example, changing it back from let's say I go back to Australian dollars like I had previously, and it shows up as 900, then what happens if I go to something different from the base currency? What will happen in that case? Well, in this case, let's say I change it to GBP, then what will be happening then? Now, I want you to note that this is 568.39 euros on the conversion rate. But if I change 900 Australian dollars to Great British pounds, like so, it will convert to 502.34. But as you can see, the euro conversion rate is the same. So we're not actually doing an exchange rate between Australian dollars to British pounds. We're instead changing the currency of the order to British pounds, but it's still taking this quantity or this value here and adjusting it to the correct euro conversion amount. So it's not always going to be 100% clear what is going on anytime you're making adjustments, but just so it's completely clear, anytime a change takes place here, it's always going to affect the actual price that's being quoted over here. So to change this back to the way it was, I put it back into euros. It's 568.39. I can keep it to 540, for example, and then adjust it to Australian dollars if I want to get it back to where it was. So that's how the dynamics work with respect to having the order currency set on a sales order and then manipulating or adjusting the sales price. It will never go back to the default sales price unless you make the order from scratch. And in that case, that would be the only situation where it would apply. Now, if we have multiple items on the order list, let's say, for example, we're going to edit this existing order. I don't have a locked conversion rate yet. So that means I haven't created an invoice. The item has not been packed, for example. So currently I have a floating rate. Let's say, for example, I add another item. Let's do another coffee table. And then I'll choose, let's say, the beige one. When I add that item into the list, it's going to convert the default sales price to the sales order currency. So that type of situation can happen, and that's totally fine and normal. No big deal with respect to that. I've gone ahead and added this item to stock. So now that we've done that, should be good to go. What happens if we do a partial fulfillment on this sales order, for example? We still have a floating rate. So what does this mean with respect to the item that's being sent out? What happens in that case? So if we do a deliver sum, and let's say we send out only one unit, which is this one, then what happens in this case? You can see that the item that gets shipped out gets reduced by the converted euro amount. Now, this rate that is sent out is captured at that moment of fulfillment. These items up here, which are still pending being packed up and shipped out, those have a floating conversion rate. So actually, when this item is sent out, it gets fixed at that conversion rate, which will calculate correctly the amount of euro cost that is leaving your inventory. This one up here still presently has a currency conversion rate that is like so, but if it ships out tomorrow and that currency conversion rate has adjusted between the Australian dollar and the euro, then it will be captured at that rate. So anytime that this type of thing is happening, that's how the rates get locked, if you're using the packing process as a way to lock those rates. Now, if you issue an invoice for those items, that fixed rate will always be locked anyway, even if the items haven't been sent out. So there's a couple of use cases where how that financial status will adjust with respect to multi-currency, depending on the actions that you're doing in your Katana account. But that should give you a general idea of how it works. Now, once you've started sending some items out from a sales order and you need to make some adjustments, you need to go into the edit rate section if you want to adjust the conversion rate at that point in time. So if the currency conversion rate was 0.62 at that point in time, then the amount of euros that are affected instead of 540 will also be adjusted to reflect that you actually had 530 euros worth of stock leave based on that different conversion rate that took place. So if you need to make those edits, that can be done. That automatically updates all of the costing in your Katana account, which would reflect any cost of goods sold or margins that are adjusted for. So if there is some exchange rate risk that either works in your favor, then you might be more profitable in certain cases, as opposed to the other way around, which would be you would be less profitable. Again, you can manipulate those as required, especially if you have to revert that order and put that item back into inventory. It's not a problem. And that's pretty much how that works from a sales order perspective. So when we're looking at things from, let's say, the purchase order perspective here on the buy screen, let's go ahead and take our paint supplier here as an example. So as I had mentioned previously, everything that is working here is kind of the exact same as it is on the sales order. So I'm going to repeat myself a little bit. When you are working with a PO, again, what we have done previously is we took this paint supplier and we made their order currency US dollars. And that order currency in US dollars would be the exchange rate of US dollars to euros whenever we are receiving goods in at a specific cost. And when the actual order gets locked, it can get locked. The fixed rates can get fixed as when you issue a bill to your accounting through an accounting integration, or when you start to mark items as received. And then they'll get adjusted for at that point in time. So again, it's important to note that the price per unit by default is pulling from the default purchase price. So the default purchase price on the black paint item here is presently $6.488 US dollars. Now, these were different because whenever we have set the default currency for a default supplier on this item card, it converted the default purchase price from our base currency of euros to US dollars. This is what makes the purchasing multi-currency features a little bit more hectic when we're talking about their nuances and how they relate to your POs. So what we're seeing here is a default purchase price in US dollars as opposed to euros. Whereas when it comes to selling items, it's a default sales price in our base currency, and then only the currency conversion takes place on the sales order, not the other way around as we're looking at it from this perspective. But we always need to know how much something costs in a different currency to make sure that we are budgeting for it correctly. Now for purchase orders, all the mechanics are still the same. So if, for example, I change the order currency, you'll see that this is converted over from the correct price of 6.1 euros, which became 6.48 when it's converted in US dollars at the current currency conversion rate. If I change this to, let's say, back to my base, then you'll see it's 6.1. If I change it to USD, you'll see it's 6.4. Now, if I adjust the price, the purchase order price here to, let's say, $7, then it's no longer going to be 6.1 euros. It doesn't default to the default purchase price that we have on the item card anymore. So let's say I make this $7, then that becomes the new price specific to this purchase order. So if you ever do any adjustments to the price on the PO in a different currency other than your own, then that becomes the new price that gets converted anytime you make an adjustment. So an example is, now that this is $7 US, I change that to my base currency. It's going to be 6.58 euros as opposed to what the default is. When we look at the default, 6.1 euros. So keep that in mind when you're making edits to your POs. Go back to the buy screen, look at this purchase order, and it is exactly the same. Now, if I convert that back to USD, it'll be 7, and then you'll see that this is the euro conversion that's presently an open euro conversion. 288.25 is what we're getting here. So if we change that to euros, you'll see it's 288.25 when I'm including tax. I'll go ahead and take the tax off, 240.21. Okay, so that's it. It's pretty simple. It's not complicated. If I were to, let's say, mark this as received, remember, we get a fixed conversion rate at certain moments, either pushing it as a bill to the accounting integration or marking it as received when it comes to POs. We'll do a receive sum workflow. Let's say we select the item and we only receive 15 liters. That 15 liters at that price which would be equivalent to what we have here, 105 USD. We choose receive. Now what this will do is that it will provide a fixed rate that all of those 15 liters that I received came in at $7 is what we paid for them, which then converted to euros of 98.72 at this specific rate. Now if the rate was different, let's say if the currency conversion rate was better in favor of the US dollars, let's say 0.96. Right now we have 98.72 euros that it converted at. If we change the conversion rate to that, then we actually have a stronger dollar and we paid more money for those items than what we normally would have. So that would mean that it would be adjusted for and cost us a couple extra euros as a result of a weaker exchange rate, which makes those items more expensive. So currently you can make adjustments as well after the fact once they're edited, and then that also gets factored into your costs. So all of those exchange rates, whatever they might be, whatever they get fixed at, go into your total costs. And of course, why this is important is because when you're looking at your items, you can also see what is the cost of those items whenever prior to manufacturing them. Now, when we start talking about outsourced purchase orders, these can also be done in the exact same way using multicurrency. So from the buy section in the outsourcing location, if, for example, we were going to generate an outsourced purchase order and we were going to get those items from furniture crafting products, and we were ordering it from a different currency other than our base currency, let's say we chose to do that in British pounds, meaning that we would buy those items in that specific order currency and use materials that we have at a secondary location for where we're tracking stock of those items which we own. Those also carry their own base euro cost. Then when we buy the service of manufacturing them and having those items received, then we're paying for that service in a different currency, which will convert also to our euro costs once they're received, and combine it with the material cost in euros. Then we have a total cost of goods sold for items that we're outsourcing the manufacturing of, as an example. So if we were to do, let's say, coffee tables, cognac colored coffee tables as an example, I'll choose this option here. And we want to order, let's say, one of them. We'll keep it simple for now. You're going to see that there is a British pound price per unit that we're purchasing those for from our supplier. Now, what could this actually be related to? If we're looking at the coffee table, the cognac colored coffee table, and we want to see what the default purchase price is, here we're seeing that it's 300 euros. This means that the 300 euros default purchase price for that product that's outsourced manufacturing is going to be listed as this for conversion to British pounds. So here on the outsourced purchase order that we've generated, if I were to take off the tax just to make it more clear, you can see that the converted total price is euros 300, which is based on the default purchase price that we've set for this coffee table. And so this would be the converted amount that we would intend to purchase it from our outsourced purchase order supplier. Now, of course, it works exactly the same way as it does with the regular purchase orders. If you change the price here, then that will be what's converted. If you change it up here, it will base it off of the default purchase price. So if I change this to euros, it's 300. If I change this to USD, it's 319. If I change it to GBP, then it's 265. So that's how it's all based. Now, if I do change that back to, if I keep it on GBP and I pay 300 pounds for it, then that means that if I convert it back to euro, it will be 339, no longer 300 like it was default. So all the same rules apply with this scenario. So if you ever change the price on the actual order, that becomes the source of reference for any currency conversion exchange rates that's made from that moment onwards. And of course, once you mark them as received, for example, then the conversion rate will be fixed as well if it's in a different currency. So that should just kind of give a general idea and an overview of all the little editing possibilities that you have when it comes to sales orders, purchase orders, as well as outsourced purchase orders with respect to multi-currency. So I hope you found that this was useful. Sorry for repeating myself so many times, but it is super important to understand all those dynamics when you're working with those different types of documents.